Hi everyone, we'd like to welcome you to this missions spotlight that we have on this Wednesday, April the 1st. We're privileged to be joined today with Dave and Julie Rudolph. We've had the privilege of knowing them for, it seems like forever, but it's been back since the 1980s that all four of us really got a chance to meet. Barb and I met in the early days at college, and that's when you guys met as well, right? During those college years. Dave and I served in the same dorm facility as well in college in South Carolina. And over this journey, over the last 30 plus years, it's really been an awesome experience for us as a church to be able to come alongside of them and partner with them in their terrific ministry in South Africa. So over the next number of minutes, we're just going to kind of focus attention on them and what they're doing and how life has been for them here in the States and at home in South Africa. And to kick that off, I'd like to start with this. Dave, why of all places did you end up in South Africa doing mission work?
Well, because I'm an African. I'm a fifth generation colonial African. My ancestors came from Britain and Germany in the 1800s to Africa. And so that's all I ever knew. I grew up in the colonial country of Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. As a kid, I grew up in a religious society, although my family never went to church. But if you had asked me if I was a Christian, I would say yes. I believed that Jesus died on the cross for the sins of the world, but didn't realize that he had died for me. When I was 15, a missionary, American missionary, came to Rhodesia and led me to Christ. God called me to preach within a year of that. I had to do military service because we were fighting a war in Rhodesia at that time. And then in 1980, I went to Bob Jones University on what they called the Timothy program. The idea was that they would train me to go back to my own country, which had changed. It became Zimbabwe. And because I'd been in the military fighting against the regime that was now in power, I couldn't go back to Zimbabwe and live there safely. So the next best place for us was South Africa. South Africa is just to the south of Zimbabwe, and that's where many Rhodesians moved to. So I would be fulfilling what I believe God called me to do, to preach to my own people. And that's what led me to South Africa.
Fantastic. Now, Julie, I'm going to put you on the spot here just a little bit. Your journey down to South Carolina was also unique as well. Tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor in New Brunswick, although they were American, and they had both been to Bob Jones before. So it was kind of natural, all of us kids journeyed down there for education. And I already felt like God wanted me in Africa somewhere. So by the time I met Dave, I had been through a relationship that had broken up, and the Lord was redirecting my mind to South Africa from another country. And so when we met, he says I chased him all around, but I didn't. I was actually interested.
Chris knows, he remembers.
That's right.
We met because of a project that I had to do, a linguistics project for a class, and the professor said, well, there's a guy on campus that speaks Afrikaans, you're gonna have to have him help you. And I said, oh, they speak English in South Africa? But so we met that way and got to know each other, and eventually, he came to visit Canada over Christmas because he couldn't go back to Zimbabwe. And my dad said, well, like, what are you thinking about this guy? And I said, well, no, I'm going as a single missionary. I've already done the relationship thing and it didn't work out very well. I'm really going to be single. And he said, well, you're going to the same place. You're both going to South Africa now. It seems like you like him, he likes you, that sort of thing. So it was kind of neat that my dad, I felt like I had his seal of approval, and my parents were so supportive when I left home for missions in ministry. And I think that's one of the biggest gifts parents can give their kids that go overseas, because it's hard to not be around your grandchildren. It's easier to let your kids go, I think, than your grandkids sometimes, and you can see that in the new families as they come to our field, the ones that feel pressure from home to be at family events and things, and really thankful for this family that the support from both my parents.
Definitely.
So Dave's parents were on the other side, so we had some family on our side, which was unusual.
So our
for us.
kids grew up along home near their grandparents, which was pretty cool. And then eventually Julie's parents, after they retired from the ministry in Canada, also came to South Africa 6 months of each year. So our kids had their godly influence upon them also, which is really neat.
Outstanding.
Yeah, and I'll interject there too. Again, when my parents started coming over, which we never expected, my mom actually found out that she had cancer when she was in Cape Town, and they decided to stay. And you know, eventually my mom passed away quite quickly from that in Cape Town. And when you leave home, it's all those things you're thinking about. Where am I going to be when my parents leave me? And you know, the Lord allowed us to be part of that journey with her. And then my dad later on had a severe stroke while he was in Cape Town, and you know, that was a special blessing that you don't expect. You know, it was pretty special for me.
Terrific. Can you take us a little bit through your journey once you arrived in South Africa? Where did it all start, and where has it taken you to this point?
Well, remember, we were in our mid-20s when we went as missionaries, so we knew nothing.
And we had also never really lived together. Okay, we had our first meeting to raise our support on our honeymoon in Prince Edward Island.
We never lived alone
We
together.
never lived, okay, yeah.
We lived
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes.
Yeah, we never had our own home. We always, the first 2 years, basically we traveled around and stayed with everybody. We probably stayed with you guys then too. And so getting there was, besides new into ministry on our own, we were also new figuring lots of things out.
Sure.
So because we believe in teamwork in missions, we believe that's biblical. We went to join a team in the city of Durban, a large city on the east coast of South Africa. The day we got there, the missionary team said, "Hey, why don't you guys go and open up Cape Town for us as your ministry project, which is about 1,800 kilometers away, well, about 1,000 miles away." And it's like, oh, okay. So we did. We did a survey there and began to build a strategy for church planting, and started recruiting team members to come and join us there. And so that's how we got started. In 1987, we arrived in Cape Town to begin that whole process. And so God blessed us with more mature missionaries than we were. So God brought couples of like faith who had more ministry and theological background to us. So that was really, really good.
Terrific. Now, from Cape Town, you developed church planting projects. You were discipling folks that were coming to know the Lord, and some of those right now have become pastoral leaders within those churches. How many churches are existing right now that you guys have been privileged to start in the Cape Town area?
Well, just remember, when we say churches started in Cape Town, it's not that we started them personally, it's that together with our team strategy, these churches started. And so there's somewhere in excess of 30 churches. I do not know exactly anymore. About 80% of those churches currently have South African pastors, men and women that we've trained for, couples that we've trained for ministry. So look, I guess there's one word to describe our strategy. Our strategy was relationships. We built redemptive relationships, discipling people to Christ. We discipled them in Christ. We discipled them for ministry. And so that's what God did. We have a camp and conference center, 450 acres in the mountains just outside of Cape Town. And that's been a tremendous rallying point for these churches, and also around our theological education. So some of those graduates from our training program are not only pastoring the churches, but they're also planting churches. So that's been tremendously gratifying to see what God has done there. Even though we're no longer in Cape Town, the ministries there continue to prosper.
So what led you from Cape Town to your current ministry in the Garden Route? What was the impetus behind that transition? Because you're really in two significantly different areas. One was more of a metropolitan type of environment, and now you're more in, I wouldn't even call it suburban, it would be more rural
towns, yes. Yeah. Well, it was a surprise to us, and in fact, in some ways an annoyance, because we thought we would spend the rest of our ministry life in Cape Town. Cape Town, when we went there, had a population of about 4.5 million, and it's grown to, I imagine, in excess of 7 million now. So we figured a 40-year strategy of ministry for us would keep us in Cape Town. But there were some believers, a few believers on the garden route east of Cape Town who had been bugging us to send church planters that direction. Well, we didn't have enough South African men trained because they were filling the churches that we had started in Cape Town. So eventually we went to go and assess it, and we agreed to go down once a month, drive 6 hours once a month on a Sunday, have a service, see if there's any interest. Well, that obviously attracted some interest. So we started going twice a month. We got other team members involved. Then we realized we needed to build a church planting team for the garden route. And Julie was the first one to acknowledge the writings on the wall. We may have to move to the garden route. We can't keep doing this from a distance. I mean, we wore out several cars with the commute going backwards and forwards. And maybe Julie should share her thoughts and her heart on the struggle of making the shift from Cape Town to the garden route.
I wasn't really excited about it, to be honest. I mean, it's a more touristy area. It's a lot slower pace. It's not as convenient. I mean, when you're in a big city, you can go anywhere and grab things quickly when you're entertaining, and there's just a different convenience and a different vibe, and we had built a lot of relationships there. So the thought of the move, I mean, the first night when Dave went down to meet with these people on the garden route, and then he came back and he said, well, I agreed that we would do this once a month. And I said to him that at that moment, you're gonna have to move there. You're making a plan. It was like, I wasn't really there. It was hard for me. I mean, I knew wherever God leads us, that's where you wanna go, but the actual move itself was not super exciting. And it was a little bit more challenging too, because once we did decide to make the move, we thought, well, within about 3 months we could sell our house, which was our equity. We needed that money to put a down payment on something else. And so we thought, well, we can rent something for about 3 months because we still have the expenses in the old area. And that went on for over 5.5 years that house did not sell. And we had Dave's mom in an apartment on the house, and we had my son living in our part of the house. So there was still expenses, and you have to really think, like, is this really of God? Does he want us to do this? Because it's taking a long time. But during that thing, you could see the way God was moving in the new area, and Dave's really good at making those initial contacts and meeting people where they are, starting to disciple people that don't know Christ to Christ. And then we were meeting believers who had no knowledge of the word.
God does a work in your heart, because while we were commuting backwards and forwards, I had a list of about 165 names on a piece of paper in my Bible, and those were my contacts. Every time I went back to the garden route, I'd look up these people. Either they were counseling, discipleship, or evangelism opportunities, and God gave me a love for the area and for the people. So I knew this, Julie was right at the beginning. Of course, I denied it at first, but
well, when you build the relationships, it's very hard for somebody else to come in because they're starting from scratch. They have to build their own relationships, so it was pretty obvious that we were going to be the people. And when you see God working too, you can see that his hand is in it all along, because we started in the smallest of the towns meeting, but there were people coming from the other towns, and then eventually, as we were there a while, we peeled off some people there to start the next church in the bigger town, and then we peeled off people from that. You could see how God has done some incredible things in what is relatively a short time along there, growing our team, growing the churches. Well, you can tell me more about that.
Well, one of the difficulties that we face in South Africa, which I think most people aren't aware of, is that South Africa is a very religious society. Because of its Christian denominational heritage over the last 300 years, South Africans have been exposed to the gospel, exposed to the word of God. Doesn't mean they're literally saved. In fact, they've been inoculated against the gospel in many cases because of the works-based Christianity that they have been exposed to. So no matter whether South Africans are of European descent or whether they're of native African descent, equally they've been exposed to denominational Christianity. So about everyone you ask, are you a Christian? They would say yes.
Sure.
And so it's really difficult to cut through all of that baggage with the simple gospel. And so what that requires then is for us to build what we call redemptive relationships, where we are using time and opportunity to keep growing or earning the right of communication in the lives of these people. So ministry in South Africa is tough. You'd think being on the African continent, ministry would just explode with success. It's never been that way. We've been there 35 years. Now God has done a work. Obviously, we have 30 plus churches in Cape Town. We have 8 churches along the Garden Route. Along the Garden Route, half of those churches now have South African pastors. But we're not done. We're in 3 towns right now on the Garden Route. We want to get into a couple more towns in time. But we still see, we realized, now the reason we've recruited other team members to come and join us, which may be a controversial subject in some missiological circles, but the reason is because of the level of relationship that has to be fostered. We need more feet on the ground to disperse and to build these long-term relationships, allowing the Spirit of God to do His work. But God's doing something there that is very. We need you to come and check it out, by the way. And
We've been saying that for
how many
more
years?
than 30.
Yeah, 30
more
years
than
for
30
sure.
for sure. So
Yes,
yes,
and you
it's time for you to come and see what God's doing there, because you guys have been part of it.
So this is on the record.
Yes.
Julie and Dave are asking us
It's
to come
official.
again. This is
Again.
like 30 years in a
We've
row.
done this before.
So you need to pray for us that we would be willing to get on that airplane and
For me.
just do that, particularly for Barb. And this is a shout out to Greg and Monica Holt, who we've been talking to, that you guys have to come with us so that you can kind of force our hand to get over there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, with relationships being a key philosophical overarching approach to ministry all across the board, and I know that it's been the same thing for us at church and in community. I know for Barb, and I'm not saying it's not been that important to me, it is important to me, but I know for her, it's really been a big deal to try to cultivate some kind of relationships here. And I know in ministry, it's not always an easy thing to do. Would that be
Yes.
right? Do you have anything that you and Julie want to banter about with that?
Well, I just was curious, with moving and being in a different culture, not in your family, have you been able to develop some friendships that are dear to you? Someone you can just go to coffee with or, spend time with.
Yeah, we're really thankful. We have, on this side of the ocean, we have very good friends, pastors in churches that we don't see very often, but when we come back to these areas, we just feel a kindred spirit.
Right.
We have a background, we have a history, and even though we don't correspond very much in between, but we have really fostered those friendships that become family on the other side of the ocean. I mean, we went to Cape Town, we didn't know one person. Well, Dave had an ex-fiance there.
But that's a story for another time.
For another time.
And they became very good friends.
You seem a little bitter.
Not at all. They became some of our dearest friends there. But as we've lived there and raised our family in Cape Town, the people that we've built the relationships with as we've discipled them along the way, they've been part of our church. They are like our family. And so when we left Cape Town, we left a big part of our heart there. Our sons both live there in Cape Town and work, and people from our churches that were our family. But as we've moved to a new area, God has brought new people into our lives, and we have an incredible team. We're really thankful for the people that God's brought along, because we haven't done it. You might pick and choose, I'd like to work with that person, but when you're in ministry, the Lord challenges somebody's heart, and they have to do the hard work of getting there and raising the funds. And then, it's been just the right people. We are the oldest people on our team. Well, I
Well, that
officially
shouldn't
am.
be any surprise to anyone.
I'm 2 weeks older than Dave, so I'm officially the oldest one. But we don't have grandchildren yet. Our sons aren't married, but there's little there's new families with young children. We have a new baby coming in September that are they're like our grandchildren. They're like, as the team has grown the last couple years, as we've seen new families come in, we knew that had to be part of our ministry too, of helping them figure out how the Lord can use them in this area. And, you know, making the team feel like part of the family. So we're just really thankful for people that we love, and some of our newest people that we have on our field in the new area where we're ministering. He was our missions pastor in Calvary at Lansdale, Pennsylvania, and we loved Troy and Danielle already. Like when we came to the States, we can't wait to see them, and to have them now on our team, that we're starting a church together, our families, and so that's been really a gift from God too.
That's awesome.
He supplies just what you need when you need it.
And just to answer from my perspective, Barb's question on Julie's behalf is that she very effectively builds relationships with women. So she has several redemptive relationships of women that we are not sure have accepted Christ yet, but she has an ongoing opportunity to speak into their lives and to counsel with them. And so that's an ongoing process. In fact, we often mention that we've got friendships between us of people that we've been trying to disciple to Christ over decades. That's the nature of ministry. You don't give up on anyone. You just keep reaching out and trying to minister the word of Christ, grace words into their lives.
Yeah, outstanding. Can you give us a little bit of an update on your latest project that you have going on, the Inspire Gorge project?
All right, so we are working in 3 towns primarily right now on the garden route: Neisner, Sedgefield, and Gorge. Sedgefield's right in the middle. Sedgefield's a little village, and on either side are these larger towns. So we started the initial church in Sedgefield. Out of that church, the churches in the neighboring towns were started originally. We focused on Neisner for the last 4 or 5 years, building a team there. We have 4 churches underway in Neisner. It has a population of 70,000. We think there's space for probably a couple more churches still in Neisner. And then in Gorge, which is the largest of the 3 town cities, it has a population of 300,000. We only have 3 church plants happening there currently, and so we see space for at least 6 more churches in the city of Gorge in the short term, besides reaching out to some of the other cities. So Julie and I live in Neisner. It's an hour away from Gorge, and so we've been working in Neisner, Sedgefield, and Gorge with some intensity in the last couple of years. But we've handed over the Neisner church to a national pastor, Wayne Schmidt, and his wife Kirsty. So our responsibilities there are quite low, and we're focusing on Gorge right now. We've started a little group there called Life Fellowship, and Troy and Danielle Gaiman, who've come to join our team, are taking the lead for that now because they live in Gorge, but we go to Gorge 3 times a week to minister there anyway. So as we look at teen church planting in these towns, one of the things that I rejected philosophically about 15 years ago is, in our context, to be raising money for individual church buildings. In other words, we did that in Cape Town. We have a number of church buildings, but I observed that the buildings were underutilized. So we would reach out to believers in North America to sacrificially help us get these churches into buildings, and somehow they haven't effectively utilized the space. So I thought it was a poor stewardship, frankly. I'm not saying anything we did was wrong. That's all we need to do.
Sure.
But in this new context along the garden route, we are resisting the effort to raise money for each church to have its own building. What we've come to accept that in this current economic situation, particularly in Africa and along the garden route, the best way to do buildings is to use multiple use facilities, where the churches cooperate with a community center or other things. You've done the same right here in Marshall. But that sets me up to say that the Inspire Gorge church planting team, as we grow that team, we realize that if we had a central facility that all the team partners can utilize as a rallying point for outreach, for seminars, for theological leadership training, as a counseling center, for youth outreach efforts and so on, that we'd be better served to have a facility that we can use together. Right. Add to that, the South African government gives us a vehicle to operate NPOs, non-profit organizations, which are tax exempt. And so our team in Gorge has a non-profit organization under which we can own property. And so we went searching for a small house to renovate as a ministry center, and God gave us two houses side by side. The developer wouldn't separate the two, and so we had to trust the Lord for a greater amount of money. So we needed $302,000 US dollars for those two houses together, and within 2 weeks God supplied 2/3 of that money, which allowed us to close on the first property. And the developer has given us until October this year for the remaining balance, which when we arrived in the States on our furlough about 6 weeks ago, we still needed $93,000, or $95 when we add the closing costs. So we were here less than a week, and one of our supporting churches in North Carolina said, "Oh, by the way, we've been meaning to tell you, but we voted to give $50,000 to that project." It's like, why did you hold back on that information? Praise the Lord. So then we had 45 to raise. And just a week ago, a church in New York have pledged $10,000, which leaves us $35,000. And so we're getting a lot closer. And the idea is we'd love to close on this property as fast as we can, because the exchange rate between the dollar and the rand, our currency, is exceptional. We've never seen it this good. Yeah. And we're not sure how long that's going to hold. So we'd love to see that remaining money come in to get that done.
Great.
So that's the Inspire Gorge project. We're in the one building already. They've done some renovations, and the Life Fellowship is starting to meet there. They're renting space on a Sunday. Well, they were until the lockdown. South Africa's completely locked down because of the virus. So that's the Inspire Gorge project.
Terrific. We look to play some role in that as well, and we're excited to be able to do a support basis on a regular basis with them, but maybe to do a little bit more. And I know some of you've asked, particularly in February timeframe, was there anything else mission-wise that you might wanted to give your resources to? Well, you've heard it from Dave and Julie. This may be something that you want to pray about and consider. As a church as a whole, we're going to be able to do some of that. But think about some of the resources that you have personally to be able to go to this project. Let's wrap this up with a little bit of an idea of how the virus is affecting things at home for you in South Africa, and how it has basically affected you here. And then we'll bring it to a close with a word of prayer.
All right, well, South Africa has been shut down, they call it lockdown by the government. The entire country is locked down. No one is allowed to leave their homes. All businesses, unless they're essential services, have shut down. The military is policing the streets. For anybody who is violating the rule, they're being arrested. So it's really tough for South Africans, and especially for those South Africans who make up the majority of the population in the poor communities, because they live in homes smaller than the space we're in here, where 3 or 4 families are living in the same space. There's no way for social distancing,
right,
and it's really tough for them. The economy is probably in downward spiral, will most likely collapse. So it's really hard to know what's happening. As a result of the shutdown, no more flights are going into South Africa, so we could not get back in time before the lockdown happened. So it's left us in limbo here. All of our meetings have been canceled here. And the instruction is by the governor of the whatever state we're in is to stay at home. Well, we don't have a home. What are we supposed to do? So we just keep moving on to the next place. But some very very kind friends in South Carolina have offered us their basement apartment until this thing lifts. So we're making our way to South Carolina. It adds obviously financial pressures because our furloughs are financed by the offerings that we get from the meetings. No meetings, no offerings. But we're trusting the Lord. We're not complaining. He's been really gracious and kind to us.
Thank you. Thank you. Listen, we need to continue to pray for Dave and Julie as well as the rest of our missionary families serving around the globe. I want to thank you guys for not only spending time with us here, but just coming through Virginia and hanging out with us for a few days as you continue on your journey wherever that is going.
Oh, can I say this to the church family is, every time we come to Northern Virginia, it reminds us how beautiful your community is with all these farms. It's just stunning right now with all of the cherry trees and so on. But thank you. You've given us some accommodation for a few days, which has really alleviated the pressure on us. And we are so grateful for that. Sorry we don't get to see you all face to face, but Lord willing, the next time we come, we'll be able to do that. Thank you for your prayers for us.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us on our Mission Spotlight here on April the 1st. Check back with us again for our updates that will be coming on Friday and for our service this coming Sunday. Thanks again for joining us.